It was just a phone call. One he almost didn't answer. But in that moment, as the Sunday sun dipped behind the trees and cast long shadows across their Scarsdale Ridge home, Paul Solomon picked up the receiver, and nothing would ever be the same again. A forgotten birthday. A jealous woman. A dinner date that should have meant nothing. And by nightfall, his wife was dead. The Sunday of January 15, 1989, had all the makings of a quiet day. Suburban silence stretched across Greenburgh, the snow muffling the world like a thick, white secret. Inside their two-story home nestled within the upscale Scarsdale Ridge neighborhood, Paul Solomon sipped lukewarm coffee at the kitchen table, flipping through a sports magazine while his wife, Jeanne, prepared lunch. They weren't a perfect couple. Far from it. But they played their parts well. He was the composed, well-liked sixth-grade teacher. She, a meticulous financial manager with little tolerance for chaos, especially emotional ones. Their 14-year-old daughter had gone to spend the day with friends. The house, unusually still, almost felt like a stage before the curtain rose. The phone rang. Paul reached for the wall-mounted receiver. "Hello? Paul." The voice was unmistakable, silky, wounded, edged with passive accusation. It was Carolyn Warmus. Paul stiffened. It had been months since their last contact. She was his former colleague, once his lover, and still, dangerously, obsessed. The way she spoke his name wasn't casual. It never had been. "You forgot my birthday," she said. No hello. No small talk. He glanced over his shoulder. Betty was slicing carrots in the kitchen. He lowered his voice. "Carolyn. I've been busy. I waited. I thought we were still something." The conversation dragged on, 55 minutes of circling the past, dancing around old flames and new regrets. Betty, pretending not to listen, moved robotically between the fridge and the stove, every clatter of a spoon against the pot more pointed than the last. That's when Paul made the first fatal choice. He agreed to dinner. By 7 p.m., Paul was pacing near their garage. The cold bit through his jacket, but he was focused on something else entirely. The Toyota Celica, his car, suddenly wouldn't start. Coincidence? No. Deliberate. He had pulled a wire loose hours earlier. With that car down, he took Betty's Dodge. "Bowling night," he said casually as he stepped out. "I'll be late." Betty didn't argue. She never did when she knew better. At the Brunswick bowling alley, Paul made just enough of an appearance. He laughed with friends, signed in, ordered a beer. Then he slipped away, as if he'd never been there at all. He arrived at the Holiday Inn at 7:45. Treetops Restaurant sat above the lobby, dim and intimate. Paul chose a booth in the far corner, out of view. Ordered a glass of red wine. Waited. 15 minutes later, she arrived. Carolyn Warmus. 23, blonde. High-end trench coat. Designer heels. She still dressed like someone who wanted to be noticed. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth. Paul looked at her, and saw trouble in a Chanel scarf. They ate. Talked. Laughed, though less than they used to. Paul told himself this was just closure. A way to put the past to rest. But Carolyn's eyes said something different. At the end of the meal, as Paul stood to leave, Carolyn leaned in. "You don't deserve to be happy," she whispered. And then she turned and walked out, the click of her heels echoing behind her like gunshots. By 1:40 a.m., Paul was home. He stepped into the house and called for his wife. Nothing. Then he saw her. Betty Jeanne lay sprawled across the living room floor. The carpet was soaked in blood. Her body, limp. Her head twisted unnaturally. And the TV was still on. He dropped the keys. Rushed to her side. Called 911, his voice breaking into frantic pieces. There's blood everywhere. My wife, she's not moving. Please, please send help. When the cops arrived, they asked Paul one question. Who knew you wouldn't be home tonight? He gave them one name. Carolyn Warmus. Sometimes, the quietest dinners hide the loudest lies. The morning after Betty Jeanne's murder, the suburban stillness of Scarsdale Ridge felt broken. Neighbors lingered a bit too long by their mailboxes, eyes flicking toward the Solomon house as if staring long enough might offer clarity. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze. The front lawn, once manicured and pristine, now marked the boundary between comfort and chaos. Paul Solomon sat stiffly on the living room couch, eyes hollow, clothes wrinkled from a sleepless night. His daughter, Jill, clung to his arm silently, her young face pale and confused. Detective Monica Reyes sat across from them, notebook open, expression unreadable. Mr. Solomon, walk me through last night again, she said gently, though her pen was poised like a blade. Paul inhaled shakily. I left around 7. Told Betty I was going bowling. Car trouble meant I had to take her Dodge. I stopped by Brunswick to say hi to the guys, just to set the scene, you know. Then I met Carolyn at the Treetops restaurant. We had dinner. Talked. Left. I came home around 1:40 a.m. And found. He didn't need to finish. The silence hung like fog. Monica jotted down notes. You said Carolyn seemed upset during dinner? Paul hesitated. She wasn't herself. I mean, she's emotional, but last night, she said something strange. Monica leaned in. What was it? As we were leaving, she said, you don't deserve to be happy. Then she just walked away. Monica closed her notebook. The words weren't just bitter, they were damning. Across town, Carolyn Warmus sipped tea in her Manhattan apartment, hands trembling slightly. The news hadn't reached her yet, but something inside twisted. Last night hadn't gone as planned. Paul was distant. Detached. And despite everything she'd sacrificed, her job, her pride, he still walked away like none of it mattered. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. Miss Warmus? This is Detective Reyes with Greenburgh PD. We'd like to speak with you about Betty Jeanne Solomon. The cup slipped from her hand. In the days that followed, the investigation spiraled. Betty's autopsy revealed 8 gunshot wounds. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. It felt personal. Calculated. Carolyn came in for questioning. She was poised, soft-spoken. Beautiful in a way that made it hard to believe she could hurt anyone. But when asked about her relationship with Paul, she dodged. I cared about him. That's all. Detectives weren't convinced. In a cluttered office in Manhattan, private investigator Vincent Parco sifted through paperwork when a familiar face flashed on the TV. Carolyn Warmus. A client from not long ago. His gut twisted. He picked up the phone. Detective Reyes? I think I have something you'll want to hear. The pieces began to fall. Phone records showed Carolyn calling Vincent just days before the murder. Security footage placed her car near the Solomon home. A .25 caliber handgun registered under a fake name, Lisa Katai, matched the shell casings at the scene. And the woman behind the alias? A friend from a summer course Carolyn once took. Beneath her designer clothes and practiced smile, Carolyn wasn't unraveling. She had never been stitched right to begin with. As the chapter closed on a funeral and reopened on a manhunt, whispers of obsession, jealousy, and betrayal echoed louder than ever. And somewhere, in a room full of evidence, sat a photograph, Betty Jean Solomon, radiant and unknowing, forever frozen just before the fall. She'd forgotten what the truth felt like. Not because she was a liar, but because every version of the story left a scar. The only question now was which one would bleed first. For 13 days, Eastdale lived on the edge of paranoia. Garage doors locked at noon. Porch lights left on in daylight. Mothers whispered at checkout lanes. The murder of Betty Gore had cracked open something primitive, a fear that evil could live next door, smile at your children, bring Jell-O to your baby shower. At first, police believed they were hunting a lunatic. Someone who had snapped, perhaps a drifter or a madman on the loose. But then came the inconsistencies. Candy's story didn't quite stick. She had scratches on her arms. A bandaged toe. And when asked, she admitted it. Yes, she told them. I was the last person to see Betty alive. It wasn't a confession. Not yet. But it was enough. Then Alan, brittle with grief, admitted to the affair. And just like that, Candy Montgomery became suspect number 1. The call came in while Alan was sitting in the dark, clutching Betty's robe. She's dead, said the neighbor. Betty's dead. His hands went cold. His next call wasn't to the police, it was to Candy. Her voice cracked. Oh my God, she whispered. Are you sure? Alan, are you sure? She hung up, stumbled to the bathroom, stripped off the bloodied underclothes she hadn't dared throw away yet. She wrapped her bleeding toe. Changed her story. Changed again. By the time the police came knocking, Candy was dry-eyed and polite. Interrogations followed. Long hours. Fluorescent lighting. Candy's lawyer, Don Crowder, was called in, a showman with a flair for dramatics and an ego as large as Texas. He needed something big. Something that would explain it all. He hired a clinical hypnotist. Under hypnosis, Candy spoke of fear. Of Betty confronting her about the affair. Of trying to end things peacefully. Of the sudden, sharp anger in Betty's eyes. She had the axe, Candy cried. She had it first. I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop. What followed was a blur of rage. A scream. A crash. The feel of the axe in her hands. Betty's blood in her mouth. The therapist believed it, Candy hadn't murdered out of hate. She'd snapped, a trauma response tied to childhood abuse. A black spot in her psyche that had split open in the heat of the moment. It was the perfect defense. And it worked. The trial began in October. Reporters packed the courtroom. Every detail leaked to the press. The town watched as Candy Montgomery cried on the stand. She attacked me, Candy said. She told me I couldn't have him. And then she came at me. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Verdict, not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Some gasped. Others swore. One woman burst into tears. Candy didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she'd been waiting for a permission slip to keep breathing. After the trial, Candy moved to Georgia. Her marriage to Pat collapsed within the year. The affair had burned everything it touched. And now, decades later, Candy lives a quiet life. She counsels teens. She teaches about trauma. And sometimes, when no one is watching, she touches the faint scar on her toe and remembers a June morning. The scent of laundry detergent. The weight of the axe. And Betty's final scream, buried deep beneath years of silence. They said time heals all wounds. But some wounds don't close, they breathe. They whisper. And in the quietest corners of the night, they bleed all over again. The years that followed the trial moved like molasses through Candy's life, slow, sticky, impossible to clean up. She left Texas, changed her last name, and tried to become someone else. In Georgia, she was just Mrs. Wheeler, a soft-spoken counselor for at-risk youth. No one asked where she came from. No one asked about Betty. But she always knew it was only borrowed time. 1981, 1 year later. Candy sat in her apartment kitchen, staring at a pot of boiling water. Her hands were steady now. Too steady. Like they'd practiced being numb. A newspaper lay folded on the table. Her face wasn't on the front page anymore. That space belonged to newer tragedies. But inside, page 14, buried beneath a headline about a gas leak in Atlanta, there it was. Alan Gore relocates to California with daughters, leaves church community. He had sold the house. Left Eastdale. Started fresh. Candy traced the grainy photo of him and his girls. Elisa looked older. Sadder. They never spoke again, not once after the trial. Alan had testified, told his truth, and when the not guilty verdict rang out, he walked away as if Candy had died too. In a way, she had. 1985, 5 years later. On a warm July afternoon, Candy passed a hardware store and froze. In the window display, gardening tools. Shiny, sharp, harmless in the light. But one of them, a wood-handled axe, was nearly identical to the one Betty had kept behind her dryer. She stood there for over 20 minutes, not moving, not blinking. People passed. Cars honked. And in her mind, she heard the thud again. The sound of metal slicing through air. Through flesh. She vomited into a nearby trash can and didn't speak for 2 days. 1990, a letter never sent. On the 10th anniversary of Betty's death, Candy wrote a letter. Dear Elisa. I held your swimsuit in my hands that morning. I was going to bring you ice cream. I thought your mom would just talk to me, maybe cry. I never planned it. But that doesn't matter, does it? Your mom is still gone. You deserve to hate me. And if I could give you back that day, I would. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. See. She never mailed it. She folded it into a small square and buried it under a patch of wild lavender in her backyard. It rained that night. Hard. 2005, a knock at the door. Candy was in her 50s when it happened. She was watching TV, something stupid and loud, when the knock came. A woman stood on her porch. Mid-30s. Pale eyes. Blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Are you Candy Montgomery? Candy's lungs seized. I'm Elisa Gore. It was like the world stopped turning. Elisa didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just stood there, holding the silence between them like a weapon. I don't want revenge, she said. I just want the truth. Candy opened the door wider. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Candy counseled dozens of broken girls over the years. But this wasn't counseling. This was confession. She told her everything. The affair. The confrontation. The axe. The fear. And finally, the scream that never left her. When she finished, she waited for Elisa to hit her. Or curse her. Or walk out and never return. Instead, Elisa stared at her for a long time. "You ruined everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you're still trying to act like you were the victim." "I know," Candy said. "You don't. But I hope one day you will." Then she stood up. Walked out. Never came back. Present day. Candy lives alone now. The counseling center shut down in 2011. Pat remarried and never looked back. Her own children moved far away. They don't speak much anymore. Every June 13th, she bakes a Jell-O salad and leaves it on her back porch. No one eats it. It melts in the sun. But it's not for them. It's for Betty. Some people say monsters wear masks. But Candy learned the truth: sometimes, the mask is the face you show your friends. Your children. Yourself. And the scariest part? You don't even realize you're wearing it. Until the blood won't wash off.